You can't monetize without value. Just because I have a problem to solve doesn't mean I will pay for it to be solved, right?
Hmm.
And so that to me is one of the biggest things to kind of unlock that mindset with, with engineering, with product, with go to market, help them understand that connection. And if as a researcher, you can then tie customer insights to that, like you become bulletproof, right? And that's one of the reasons why I actually look at research unlocking more for my career than pricing did in some ways. Because once I was able to come to the table and really own all those customer insights, like you can't argue with customer quotes, right? I know that that's a very high level statement, but the moral of the story is when you become the owner of like, well, this is what the customers are saying, you have a ton of value and leverage and visibility, because we know that there's always a hierarchy to insights in an organization. At SailPoint, like the hierarchy was always customers. Like direct customer feedback was the most trusted source, and then you'd have kind of sales, or well, then we'd look at like customer data, like telemetry and usage. Because the other thing is there's a difference between perception and like reality, right? And so you have to marry those together. Here's what people say, here's what people do.
Yeah.
And then, unfortunately, on kind of the third rung is going to be like sales and PS and customer support
Right.
feedback, right? Very,
Right.
very valuable insights, but there's always a bias there, right? So that we
Right.
have to be aware of. Part of what I did also was take the pricing team from an operational team to a strategic team as well. And so
Hmm.
they were like, hey, can you do that with research?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't about, abandoning any of like the design research. We all did that as well. But it was about up leveling the research and taking on more of those strategic projects by saying, hey, projects like go understand the enterprise segment of the market. What's our strategy for being able to go down market, right? It's, looking at, hey, how do we go, approach this problem space? What would we need to do to be competitive there? Those types of bigger organizational opportunities, those we really were able to expand and open kind of the door for those. And those are the things that are going to drive, the $100 million opportunities.
Hmm.
And, we can even credit literally the birth of what is now the fastest growing product in SailPoint history to research that we did. We're doing research on an acquisition, and we started hearing, and this is the secret sauce of research that keeps us all employed, but we started hearing from customers, hey, this isn't resonating, but actually over here, to get really technical, like we're doing research on third-party contractors, and they were saying, hey, what about service accounts? So for any of you in cybersecurity or in DevOps, that will resonate. And we realized that, the machine account problem was, 10 times bigger, and people had a
Wow.
desire and an urgency to solve that now. And that came from a totally slightly unrelated project, and then that pivoted into us building a business case because we were able to show that 70% of the customers we talked to actually prioritized that as a bigger problem to solve than the other ones. And that wasn't
Hmm.
even in the intent, that was nowhere in the script, right? It was just something we started noticing, and kind of we're like, hey, that's a pivot. We have in our repository over 550 interviews from the last 2 years or so that are in there. And so, we can now train agents on, persona-based agents on all these transcripts, right? Where we talk about being able to factor in other information from other areas is kind of the second thing. So creating intelligence centers, right? Being able to plug in things from like Gainsight, from Salesforce, from maybe if you have sales transcription tools like Chorus or Gong, those transcripts, win-loss, things like that. Things that I know all of us have always wanted to do, but we never have the time to do, right? Doing like letting LLMs what LLMs do best and really parse a lot of that information and help us digest it and connect those dots. That's going to give us, like, where else in an organization are you going to be able to bring all of those things together, right? Everyone's looking at those things in their silos, but no one's connecting the dots. And if you can do that as a researcher, then you can find those kind of needles in the haystack. But also, if you become like that becomes your brand, just creating, visibility on those things, putting out information, sharing out information, you can become, a very recognizable force in that area in your organization. Just having that mindset of, what is most valuable, because it's not that the third party stuff wasn't valuable. It was a legitimate problem to solve, right? And SailPoint did that acquisition and it's been a great product. But we were able to show that the machine problem was more important. It was most important, right? And if someone
Because you
had
were
to
doing that
choose,
value comparison,
yeah,
and you were
it was
trying to
if
kind
you
of,
had to choose where you were going to spend your money, it was going to be this one over that one. But that was still a great problem, right? It wasn't discrediting that at all. It was just saying this is more important.
where else have you seen the application of AI
Yeah.
to be able to kind of really impact both the monetization strategy as well as like product strategy research?
Yeah. So I think, one of the things that made Marvin so successful in SailPoint was the repository. We were
Mm,
able to really get a lot of buy-in from the PMs on
mm,
using like AI as like within the repository. And that became a very, commonly used, tool for PMs. There's, literally multiple product instances with product development right now where they created those PRDs based like 95% on repository based research, right?
mm.
Where they were able to
Oh,
go
wow.
in and look through, the years where these things have come up very organically and, just building those things. Now, of course, like there's other validation going into it, but
Right.
that was the primary source for a big part of, getting those things off the ground.
Hmm.
And so, you know, the AI in Marvin to me is, really, really great. Being able to just create a repository that you can then go use to, source those types of things. That was one of the biggest value adds that, I look at what we did with the research team and, that has changed the product org fundamentally. We have to speak the language of corporate communications, right? We have to
Right.
get that, catch people's attention, right? You have to think like a marketer almost, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
you have
Right.
to
Right. Right.
market your insights to the organization. And
Hmm.
AI does that so well, right? And again, it's not just plug and play here, like, please read and please, tailor it to your voice. Claude is really great for this as well. I think that's,
Hmm.
everyone knows that. But, creating executive summaries, if you can create some visuals, right? Things that will catch attention, even GIFs, right? We've
Hmm.
done little video GIFs. On my team, we did sort of this, we played off the Spotify year-end in review, and we did this like year-end in review type thing where we said, hey, here's our top insights from 2024. Here's the trends we're looking at in 2025. Here's how many interviews we did. Here's, blah, and we create this little video. And just things like that are so easy to do now. And it just, it sets you apart and catches people's attention.
Hmm.
And you can do that with AI now so easily. And so take
Yeah.
advantage.
Before I let you go, 30 seconds, one quick takeaway from this conversation.
Monetization is value, value equals trade-offs.